Her husband told his friends that he doubted their marriage would survive another year, claiming she was nowhere near his level. They laughed, proud of him. She simply smiled and said, "Why wait a year? Let's end it today." Then she walked out, calm, silent, and free. But that night, his best friend sent her a message that made her breath catch. "Hi, my beautiful family. Welcome back to your own family channel. May the Almighty bless every woman with strength that never fades and grace that never ends. May your hearts stay full of peace and your homes overflow with love. You are the reason this world still shines, because a woman's love keeps every home alive. But my family, why don't you like or comment? It takes just 1 second of your time, yet it means the world to me. YouTube is trying to vanish this channel, to silence our beautiful family. Don't let that happen. Let's stand together. Our goal is 1,000 likes on this story. Let's show them that Mr. Peter's family never gives up. If your heart is true, like the video. If your love is real, write, "I am with Mr. Peter." Some women are born into shame, others marry into it. And Lindsay Lamb had spent 3 years perfecting the art of swallowing hers whole. The ballroom at the Belmont Hotel glittered with crystal, chandeliers, and the laughter of people who'd never questioned whether they belonged anywhere. Lindsay stood near the dessert table, her hands smoothing down the simple black dress she'd saved for months to buy, watching her husband hold court like a king among his subjects. Charlie Dean's birthday parties were never celebrations. They were exhibitions of power, carefully staged productions where he reminded everyone exactly where they stood in his carefully constructed hierarchy. She'd spent 3 days planning this party, 3 days calling caterers and florists and the hotel manager, using money from her own meager savings, because Charlie had declared it would be good practice for her to manage a real event. She'd chosen his favorite foods, arranged for his college friends to fly in, even baked the cake herself after taking an online baking class because he'd mentioned once, years ago when he still pretended to be kind, that he loved homemade German chocolate cake. "Lindsay, darling, couldn't you have found something more appropriate to wear?" The voice cut through her thoughts like a blade wrapped in silk. Moira Dean, Charlie's mother, materialized beside her, resplendent in emerald silk that probably cost more than Lindsay's entire wardrobe. "This is a sophisticated crowd, after all. I know you did your best with what you have, but still," the nearby guests turned to look. Lindsay felt their eyes cataloguing her dress, her shoes, her simple hairstyle, finding her wanting in ways both visible and invisible. She manufactured a smile, the same smile she'd been wearing like armor for 3 years. "I thought simple was elegant." Simple. Moira repeated the word as if tasting something sour. "Well, that's certainly one word for it." She drifted away, trailing expensive perfume and casual cruelty. Dinner was served at long tables, decorated with white roses that Lindsay had personally approved. She sat beside Charlie, who barely acknowledged her presence, too engrossed in a conversation with his associate about quarterly projections and market trends. When the servers brought out the salads, Lawrence Finch, a man whose handshake always lasted too long, leaned across the table toward Lindsay. "So, Lindsay, what is it you do again?" His tone was friendly, but his eyes held that peculiar blend of curiosity and condescension she'd grown to recognize. Before she could open her mouth, Charlie's voice overrode hers. "Lindsay keeps our home running smoothly. It's plenty for her capabilities, trust me." He laughed, and the table laughed with him, the sound rolling over Lindsay like a wave she couldn't escape. She'd heard worse. Over 3 years, she'd heard much worse. The time Charlie told his friends she'd married him for his money, even though she'd had a full scholarship to community college and had been working 2 jobs when they met. The time he'd served her expired food deliberately, then mocked her for being dramatic when she spent the night violently ill. The afternoon her father had a heart attack and Charlie refused to leave a golf game, forcing her to take 2 buses across town while crying so hard she could barely see. The main course arrived, filet mignon, that Lindsay had selected because Charlie loved it. She watched him cut into his steak with surgical precision, talking animatedly about his latest achievements at work, never once acknowledging that she existed beside him. When someone asked about their upcoming anniversary, Charlie waved his hand dismissively. 3 years down. Who knows how many more to go? The table laughed again, that awful sound that had become the soundtrack of her marriage. The cake arrived. Her cake, the one she'd spent hours perfecting. Charlie cut into it with a silver knife, took a bite and made an exaggerated grimace. Well, it's definitely dry, but Lindsay tried her best. She's not naturally talented at domestic things either. But what can you do? More laughter. Always more laughter. Lindsay watched pieces of her cake being distributed to guests who ate it politely, some leaving it half-finished on their plates, and felt something inside her begin to crack. Then came the speech. Charlie stood, scotch in hand, his face flushed with alcohol and the particular glow of a man who believed himself invincible. The room quieted. He raised his glass, and Lindsay felt her stomach twist into a knot of dread. I want to thank everyone for coming tonight. You've all been asking me about my marriage, why I seem restless lately, why I haven't settled down the way you all expected. He paused, taking a long sip of his drink. Here's the truth, and you know I've always been honest with you. I give this thing maybe another year tops. Lindsay's a sweet girl, but let's be real. She's just not on my level. Not intellectually, not socially, not professionally. She went to community college, for God's sake. My mother keeps asking when I'll get serious with someone appropriate, and I keep thinking, Mom, I made a mistake when I was young. I'll correct it soon enough. The room erupted. His friends howled with laughter, clapping Charlie on the back. Someone shouted, finally being honest? Moira Dean sat at the head table, nodding approvingly, as if her son had just announced a promotion rather than the systematic destruction of another human being. Lindsay saw it all through a strange fog, as if she were watching the scene from very far away. Across the room, only one face showed horror. Garrett Hunt, Charlie's friend since college, looked like he might be sick. But he said nothing. He'd said nothing for 3 years, while watching Charlie slowly dismantle Lindsay piece by piece. Charlie sat down, leaned over, and kissed Lindsay's cheek. His breath smelled like expensive scotch and casual cruelty. Don't take it personally, sweetheart, he whispered, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. You knew what this was. The thing that had been cracking inside Lindsay finally shattered. But instead of breaking her, it freed her. She stood, and the movement was so unexpected that conversations faltered. She looked at her husband, really looked at him, and saw him clearly for perhaps the first time. Not as the man she'd hoped he'd become, not as the person she'd tried to please, but as exactly who he'd always been. You're absolutely right, Charlie. Her voice cut through the murmurs, clear and calm as glass. Why wait another year? Why waste 12 more months of both our lives pretending this is something it never was? I'll have my lawyer contact yours on Monday morning. Enjoy your party. She walked toward the exit, her spine straight, her head high. Behind her, the silence was deafening. Someone whispered, did she just... But Lindsay didn't stop to hear the rest. She walked through those hotel doors and into the cool night air, and for the first time in 3 years, she could breathe. Her phone buzzed as she waited for a taxi. Then again, she looked at the screen through tears she hadn't realized were falling. The first message was from Garrett. I've watched him destroy you for 3 years. I'm sorry I never said anything. You deserve so much better. If you need anything, and I mean anything, I'm here. He doesn't deserve to breathe the same air as you. She stared at those words, her chest tight. Then a second message appeared. I need to tell you something about Charlie. Something I should have told you before you married him. Something you need to know. Can we meet tomorrow? Lindsay looked back at the hotel, its windows glowing with warm light and cold people. She thought about the girl she'd been when she met Charlie. Confident, ambitious, full of dreams about building something meaningful with her life. She thought about the woman she'd become, apologizing for existing, believing herself worthless. Shrinking smaller and smaller to fit into spaces he'd convinced her were all she deserved. Then she thought about something her mother had told her before she died, when Lindsay was just a girl. Baby, never let anyone convince you that their opinion of you is more important than your own. The day you do, you stop being yourself and start being their idea of you. And that's the loneliest thing in the world. Lindsay typed her response to Garrett with shaking hands. Tomorrow, tell me everything. The taxi arrived. As it pulled away from the Belmont Hotel, Lindsay didn't look back. She was done looking back. Somewhere ahead, in a future she couldn't yet see, was the woman she was supposed to become. And for the first time in 3 years, Lindsay Lamb understood that the only person who could build that woman was herself. Chapter 2. The Excavation. Rebuilding yourself from nothing is hard. Rebuilding yourself from the ruins of someone else's cruelty is an act of war, and Lindsay Lamb was about to become a soldier. In a battle for her own soul, the diner where she met Garrett was the kind of place that served breakfast all day and never asked questions. Lindsay slid into a booth near the back, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee she couldn't taste, and waited. She'd spent the night in a motel room that smelled like bleach and old cigarettes, lying awake, replaying every moment of her marriage, seeing patterns she'd been too close to recognize. Garrett arrived looking wrecked. His tie was crooked, his eyes bloodshot, his usual easy charm replaced by something heavier. He sat down across from her and didn't bother with pleasantries. There was a woman before you. Her name was Sienna Worth. Charlie dated her in college. He spoke quickly, as if afraid he'd lose his nerve. He did to her exactly what he did to you. Told her she wasn't smart enough, wasn't sophisticated enough, wasn't enough. He convinced her to drop out of her honors program to work and support him while he finished his degree. Then he dumped her right before graduation, told her she was holding him back. Last I heard, she never went back to school. She's working retail somewhere, barely making ends meet. The coffee cup trembled in Lindsay's hands. Why didn't you tell me? Because I'm a coward, Garrett's voice cracked. Because Charlie's been my friend since we were kids, and I wanted to believe he'd changed. Because telling you meant admitting I'd watched it happen before and done nothing. I thought maybe with you it would be different. But it wasn't. He doesn't know how to love people, Lindsay. He only knows how to use them and throw them away when they stop reflecting the image he wants. He slid a piece of paper across the table. A phone number. That's Sienna's contact information. You don't have to call her. But I thought you should know you weren't the first, and if someone doesn't stop him, you won't be the last. Lindsay stared at the paper. Another woman. Another life destroyed by the same hands that had held hers on their wedding day. Does his mother know? Moira Dean knows everything. She taught him to be what he is. Convinced him that people are commodities to be ranked by education and breeding and social position. She destroyed him first, Lindsay. Then he destroyed you. It's a family tradition. After Garrett left, Lindsay sat in that diner for another hour thinking. The easy thing would be to take whatever settlement Charlie's lawyers offered, disappear, rebuild quietly somewhere far away. The hard thing would be to stay, to face him, to become someone he could never diminish again. She called Sienna that afternoon. They met at a park, two women who didn't know each other but shared a wound shaped exactly like Charlie Dean. Sienna was younger than Lindsay had expected, with tired eyes and hands that picked nervously at the edges of her jacket. He told me I was too stupid to finish my degree, Sienna said, staring at the ground. I had perfect grades before I met him. After being with Charlie, I couldn't remember why I'd thought I was smart in the first place. When he left, I tried to go back to school, but I couldn't focus. I kept hearing his voice telling me I'd never make it, that I was wasting everyone's time. Lindsay reached across the bench and took Sienna's hand. We're going to prove him wrong, both of us. Over the following months, Lindsay rebuilt her life piece by piece. She moved into a small apartment in a neighborhood where nobody knew her name or her shame. She took a job as an administrative assistant at a medical office, then added evening shifts, waitressing at a restaurant downtown. The work was hard, the hours brutal, but every paycheck was hers. Every decision was hers. Every breath belonged to her alone. At the medical office, she noticed something within her first month that everyone else had missed. The filing system was causing insurance claim delays that cost the practice thousands monthly. She stayed late one evening, reorganized the entire system, and created a simple checklist that reduced errors by half. Her supervisor was stunned. "You didn't have to do this," the woman said. "This isn't your job." Lindsay just smiled. "I saw a problem. I fixed it." For the first time in years, she felt the satisfaction of using her mind without asking permission. At the restaurant, she became the server who remembered every regular's order, who could juggle 6 tables during rush hour without breaking composure, who calmed angry customers with a combination of genuine apology and quiet confidence. The owner pulled her aside one night and offered her a management position. She thanked him but declined. She had other plans. But she kept the compliment close, proof that she was capable of excelling at anything she committed to. She enrolled in night classes, teaching herself everything she'd been too afraid to learn while married to Charlie. She read books about rebuilding after trauma, about toxic relationships, about women who'd survived worse and become more. She cut her hair short, not because she thought it would make her beautiful, but because she wanted to look in the mirror and see someone new. The divorce proceedings were exactly as cruel as she'd expected. Charlie's lawyers painted her as a gold digger, even though she asked for nothing except her freedom. Charlie himself oscillated between drunk phone calls, where he begged her to come back, and sober conversations, where he told mutual acquaintances she'd had a breakdown. Couldn't handle being married to someone successful. Left him without explanation. Lindsay let him talk. Words were all he had left. She stayed in touch with Sienna and slowly, carefully helped her friend find the courage to re-enroll in community college. They studied together some evenings, 2 women reclaiming educations that had been stolen from them. Sienna started to smile again, started to remember who she'd been before Charlie Dean convinced her she was nothing. "Do you hate him?" Sienna asked one night over cheap wine in Lindsay's tiny apartment. Lindsay considered the question carefully. "I don't think about him enough to hate him. I think about who I'm becoming instead." Garrett remained an unexpected ally, helping Lindsay network, introducing her to people who might have opportunities, never asking for anything in return except the chance to prove he was better than his silence had been. He started dating someone, a woman named Faye, who taught high school English and laughed easily. Lindsay liked her immediately. The real turning point came when Lindsay found a job posting for an entry-level position at a consulting group that helped struggling organizations restructure. She had no formal qualifications, no impressive resume, no connections. What she had was a detailed analysis. She'd written of the consulting group itself, their 3 biggest weaknesses, and exactly how to fix them, which she attached to her application with a cover letter that read simply, "I know how to identify problems everyone else is too polite to mention. Give me one chance to prove it." They called her in for an interview. The woman across the desk was skeptical, her eyes scanning Lindsay's sparse resume with visible doubt. "Your background is limited. Why should we take a chance on you?" Lindsay met her gaze without flinching. "Because I've spent 3 years watching someone systematically try to destroy my confidence, and I'm still here. Because I rebuilt myself from nothing, with no help and no safety net. Because I understand failure from the inside, which means I know exactly how to fix it. You don't need someone who's never been broken. You need someone who knows how to rebuild." She was hired that same afternoon. On her first day at the consulting group, Lindsay discovered that one of their main competitors was Hartwell and Associates, where Charlie worked. The irony was almost too perfect. She smiled, logged into her computer, and got to work proving that the woman Charlie Dean had tried to bury was going to rise so high he'd need a telescope to see her. That evening, Lindsay stood at her apartment window, looking out at the city lights. She thought about the girl who'd walked out of the Belmont Hotel with nothing but her dignity. She thought about Sienna, taking classes again, dreaming again. She thought about all the women who'd been told they weren't enough by men who were barely anything at all. And Lindsay Lamb made herself a promise. She would become so undeniably extraordinary that Charlie Dean's opinion of her would become nothing more than static in a symphony she was about to compose. She didn't know exactly how yet, but she knew that every empire starts with a single stone laid in defiance of everyone who said it couldn't be built. She was laying her first stone tonight, and she wouldn't stop building until the whole world could see what Charlie Dean had been too blind to recognize. Chapter 3. The Rising Tide. Success, Lindsay learned, wasn't about proving them wrong. It was about building something so undeniable that their opinions became smoke in the wind. The offices of Meridian Strategy Group occupied the 15th floor of a building downtown, all glass walls and open spaces designed to foster collaboration. Lindsay arrived every morning before sunrise and left long after sunset, pouring herself into every project with the intensity of someone who had something to prove. Not to anyone else anymore, but to herself. She took on the cases nobody else wanted, the failing organizations with toxic cultures and bleeding finances, and she did something remarkable with them. She listened. While other consultants came in with predetermined solutions and glossy presentations, Lindsay sat in break rooms and talked to receptionists. She ate lunch with warehouse workers and custodians. She asked questions that made executives uncomfortable. Who gets heard here and who gets ignored? Who takes credit and who does the actual work? Where does the cruelty hide? She'd lived inside dysfunction. She recognized its architecture. Her first major success came with a manufacturing company that was hemorrhaging employees and profits. The executives blamed lazy workers and market conditions. Lindsay spent 2 weeks on the factory floor and discovered the real problem: a floor manager who ruled through intimidation, stealing ideas from his team and presenting them as his own, creating an environment where talented people either quit or stopped trying. She presented her findings with such precision and documentation that the company had no choice but to act. The manager was removed. Within 3 months, productivity increased and turnover dropped. Lindsay's reputation began to spread. She'd also transformed physically, though not in pursuit of beauty. She'd started boxing at a gym near her apartment, learning to channel rage into movement, to hit something that couldn't hit back. The training made her strong in ways that had nothing to do with muscles. She walked differently now, shoulders back, chin up, taking up space without apologizing for it. She bought clothes that fit her body instead of hiding it, learned to meet people's eyes without flinching, stopped shrinking herself to make others comfortable. One evening, Garrett met her for coffee at their usual place. He'd been dating Faye for several months now, and the relationship seemed to be making him braver, more honest. "I saw Charlie last week," he said carefully, watching Lindsay's reaction. She felt nothing. No spike of anxiety, no twist of anger, just mild curiosity. "How is he?" "Engaged to someone named Brielle Ashford. Old money, right family, everything his mother wanted. He seems miserable, but he won't admit it." Garrett stirred his coffee, not drinking it. "He asked about you. I told him you were doing well. He didn't believe me." "Good," Lindsay said simply. "Let him not believe it." "His belief or disbelief is irrelevant to my reality." "You've changed," Garrett observed. "Not just the hair or the way you dress. Something deeper." "I stopped waiting for permission to exist," Lindsay said. "That changes everything." The divorce was finalized on a gray Tuesday afternoon. Lindsay signed the papers in her lawyer's office, officially severing herself from Charlie Dean. She'd asked for nothing except her freedom, and she'd gotten it. Walking out of that building, she felt lighter than she had in years. That evening, she came home to find flowers on her doorstep, white roses with a card from Garrett that read, "Today is the first day of your real life." But the real turning point came at the Regional Leadership Forum, a conference where consultants and executives gathered to discuss organizational challenges. Lindsay had been invited to speak on a panel about workplace culture, a surprising honor for someone so new to the field. She spent weeks preparing, crafting a presentation that was part analysis, part confession, all truth. The day of the panel, she stood backstage, her hands shaking slightly, listening to the moderator introduce the speakers. When her name was called, she walked onto that stage and looked out at 300 faces, and something inside her clicked into place. "I want to talk about power," she began, her voice steady. "Not the kind you earn through competence or leadership, but the kind you take through cruelty. The power that comes from making other people feel small so you can feel large. I know about this kind of power because I lived under it for 3 years. My former husband was a master at it. The casual dismissals, the public humiliations disguised as jokes, the systematic destruction of confidence. He convinced me I was worthless, and I believed him because I thought his opinion mattered more than my own." The room was absolutely silent. Lindsay could see people leaning forward, captivated. "What I learned is that toxic people don't just damage individuals, they damage entire systems. They create cultures where talent leaves, mediocrity thrives, and everyone is too afraid to speak truth to power. And the only way to fix these systems is to stop protecting the people breaking them. We have to be willing to name cruelty when we see it, to remove people who use their positions to destroy others, to believe victims when they tell us what's happening behind closed doors." She spoke for 20 minutes, weaving research and personal experience into something that felt both vulnerable and powerful. When she finished, the audience erupted in applause. Several people stood. Lindsay walked off that stage knowing she'd just changed something fundamental about her trajectory. In the audience, though Lindsay didn't know it, sat a man named Harrison Vale. He was older, distinguished, with silver threading through his dark hair, and the kind of presence that commanded attention without demanding it. Harrison had built an empire from nothing: real estate, technology investments, renewable energy projects, philanthropic foundations. He was known in certain circles as someone who did things differently, who valued integrity over profit, who asked difficult questions and actually listened to the answers. After the panel, Harrison approached Lindsay as she was gathering her things. "Ms. Lamb," he said, extending his hand, "that was the most honest analysis of organizational dysfunction I've heard in 2 decades. I run a company called Vale Enterprises, and we're in the middle of a significant restructuring. I'd like to discuss the possibility of bringing you in as a consultant. Would you be willing to have dinner and talk about it?" Lindsay looked at this man who'd sought her out, who'd listened to her story and seen competence rather than damage. "Dinner sounds fine. When?" "Tomorrow evening, if you're available. I'll send a car." After he left, Lindsay stood in the empty conference room, her heart racing. She'd just been approached by Harrison Vale, a name she recognized from articles and interviews, someone whose work she'd studied. She pulled out her phone and texted Sienna. Something just happened. Something big. That night, Lindsay couldn't sleep. She researched Vale Enterprises, reading everything she could find about Harrison's approach to building companies. He'd grown up poor, put himself through college working 3 jobs, built his first company from a loan he'd taken out against his beat-up car. He'd been married once, his wife dying tragically, and he'd thrown himself into work and philanthropy, creating programs that helped people from backgrounds like his own. Everything she read suggested he was the real thing, someone who'd succeeded without stepping on others to get there. The next evening, a car arrived to take her to dinner. She'd chosen her outfit carefully, professional but confident, a deep blue dress that made her feel powerful. The restaurant was elegant but not pretentious, the kind of place where people went to actually talk rather than be seen. Harrison was already there, and he stood when she approached, pulling out her chair himself. "Thank you for coming," he said. "I wasn't sure you would." "I wasn't sure either," Lindsay admitted. "I'm not used to good things happening without strings attached." "No strings," Harrison promised. "Just a conversation between 2 people who might be able to help each other." They talked for 3 hours. Harrison told her about Vale Enterprises, the problems he was seeing, the resistance to change he was encountering. Lindsay asked questions, probing gently but persistently, and offered observations that made him laugh and nod in recognition. But what struck her most was how he listened, not just to respond, but to understand. When she spoke, his attention never wavered. He asked follow-up questions. He challenged her ideas, but respected her expertise. He treated her like an equal, which was an experience so novel it was almost disorienting. "I want to hire you," Harrison said as dinner was ending. "Not for a single project, but as an ongoing consultant for Vale Enterprises. I need someone who sees what I'm too close to see, who isn't afraid to tell me when I'm wrong, who understands that fixing organizations means fixing the way people treat each other. I think that person is you." Lindsay studied him across the table. "Why? You don't really know me." "You heard one speech." "I heard one speech that told me everything I need to know about your values and your capabilities, and I've spent 3 hours watching how your mind works. You're exactly what my company needs." He paused. "The question is whether this is what you need. So I'm going to make you an offer, and you're going to take a week to think about it before you answer. Fair?" "Fair," Lindsay agreed. Harrison outlined a consulting contract that would pay her more than she'd made in the entire previous year. It would require her to dedicate significant time to Vale Enterprises, to attend executive meetings, to have real influence over major decisions. It was an opportunity that should have gone to someone with decades more experience. It was also exactly what she'd been working toward without realizing it. As they walked out of the restaurant, Harrison turned to her. "Can I ask you something personal?" "You can ask. I might not answer. The man you mentioned in your speech, your former husband, does he know what you've become?" Lindsay smiled. "Not yet, but he will." She went home that night and sat at her kitchen table thinking. She thought about the girl who'd walked out of the Belmont Hotel believing she was worthless. She thought about Sienna back in school, rebuilding. She thought about all the hours she'd spent proving to herself that she was more than Charlie Dean's assessment of her worth. And she realized that she'd arrived at a crossroads. She could stay safe, take smaller steps, build slowly, or she could leap. Lindsay called Harrison the next morning. "I don't need a week. My answer is yes." 3 days later, as she was leaving her apartment to meet with Harrison's team, Lindsay ran into a neighbor checking mail. The woman did a double take. "Lindsay, you look amazing. What's going on?" Lindsay thought about how to answer that question. Finally, she smiled and said simply, "I'm becoming who I was supposed to be all along." Chapter 4. The architect of her own fortune. Power, real power, doesn't announce itself with noise. It walks in quietly and changes everything without asking permission. And Lindsay Lamb was about to make seismic shifts in perfect silence. Vale Enterprises was unlike any place Lindsay had worked. The headquarters occupied an entire building, all clean lines and natural light, with spaces designed for both collaboration and quiet focus. But what struck her immediately was the atmosphere. People smiled. They spoke to each other with respect. When she walked through the halls with Harrison on her first official day, employees greeted him warmly but without fear. This was what healthy leadership looked like. Harrison introduced her to his executive team with simple directness. "This is Lindsay Lamb. She's going to be working closely with all of us to identify inefficiencies and improve how we operate. Her authority comes directly from me, which means when she asks questions, you answer them honestly. When she makes recommendations, you take them seriously. Clear?" The executives nodded, though Lindsay could see skepticism in some of their eyes. She was young, relatively inexperienced, and worst of all, she'd been brought in by the boss, which made them suspicious that she was some kind of spy or enforcer. She'd have to prove herself to them, but she'd been proving herself to doubters her whole life. She knew how to do it. She spent her first 2 weeks simply observing. She attended meetings, reviewed files, ate lunch with employees at every level. She noticed patterns, which executives interrupted others, who took credit for whose ideas, where decisions got bottlenecked by ego rather than process. She saw talent being underutilized because the people holding it didn't look or sound like what leadership expected. She watched resources being wasted on projects that served individual agendas rather than company goals. Then she started asking uncomfortable questions. In a meeting with the real estate development division, she interrupted a presentation to ask why the team had no women in leadership positions, despite having several highly qualified women in junior roles. The division head, a man named Preston Marsh, bristled. "We promote based on merit, not demographics." "Merit as defined by whom?" Lindsay asked calmly. "Because I've reviewed the performance data, and 3 of your junior team members have consistently higher success rates than your senior leads. Yet they've been passed over for promotion multiple times. Can you explain why?" Preston couldn't. Harrison, sitting at the head of the table, said quietly, "I'd like an answer to that question too, Preston." Within a month, 2 of those junior team members were promoted. Within 3 months, the real estate division's performance improved measurably. Word spread through the company. Lindsay Lamb saw things others missed, and she wasn't afraid to name them. Her most significant early victory came with the technology investment division. They'd been underperforming for over a year, and nobody could figure out why. The division head, a man everyone liked, insisted the market was just tough. Lindsay spent a week embedded with the team and discovered the problem wasn't the market, it was theft. The division head had been systematically taking the most promising investments identified by his team, routing them through a side company he partially owned, then claiming the successes as his own, while blaming the team for the failures that remained in Vale's portfolio. Lindsay brought her findings to Harrison privately. With documentation so thorough, there was no room for doubt. Harrison's face went white with rage. "How long has this been happening?" "At least 2 years, possibly longer." And nobody said anything. The people who knew were afraid. He had friends in high places. He had a reputation as someone who could make or break careers. "Sound familiar?" Harrison understood immediately. "Like your ex-husband. Exactly like my ex-husband. These people don't change industries. They just change locations." The division head was fired within days. 3 of his friends on the executive team, people who'd known what was happening and said nothing, were asked to resign. Harrison promoted a woman named Kendall Liu, who'd been buried in a junior analyst position despite having one of the sharpest investment minds in the company. Within 6 months, the technology division became Vale's most profitable unit. Lindsay's reputation within the company shifted from skepticism to respect. Employees started coming to her with problems they'd been afraid to raise, knowing she'd actually listen and act. Harrison began including her in discussions that went far beyond her initial consulting role. Strategic planning, major acquisitions, philanthropic initiatives. Their professional relationship deepened into friendship, built on mutual respect and shared values. But it was more than friendship, though neither acknowledged it directly. Harrison found himself looking forward to their meetings in ways that had nothing to do with work. He valued her mind, yes, but he also found himself captivated by her humor, her insights on everything from architecture to literature, the way she listened with complete attention when he talked about his late wife and his grief. Lindsay noticed how she relaxed around Harrison in ways she hadn't with anyone else, how his presence made her feel both challenged and safe, how he never once made her feel like she needed to be smaller or quieter or less than everything she was. The shift happened gradually, like seasons changing. Meetings that could have been emails turned into long conversations. Work dinners stretched into evenings, spent talking about everything except work. Harrison would find small ways to touch her hand during discussions, and Lindsay stopped flinching from casual contact. They danced around what was growing between them, both afraid to name it, both carrying wounds that made trust terrifying. Then came the profile in Leadership Quarterly, one of the most respected publications in the field. The journalist had spent weeks researching the transformation at Vale Enterprises, interviewing employees at every level. The resulting article was titled, "The Woman Rebuilding Corporate Culture, One Honest Conversation at a Time." It featured a photograph of Lindsay in Vale's offices, looking confident and composed, and included extensive quotes about her approach to organizational dysfunction. The article detailed her background: community college education, 3-year marriage to a prominent consultant that ended in divorce, her rapid rise through the consulting world. But what got attention was her methodology and her philosophy. She spoke about toxic leadership, about the economic cost of protecting abusers, about the need to believe people when they report mistreatment. She talked about building systems that value humanity as much as profit. The article quoted Harrison extensively praising her work and crediting her with saving his company from quietly rotting from the inside. The magazine was distributed to every major organization in the region. Lindsay got calls from 3 companies wanting to hire her. A university invited her to speak to their graduate program. Her former boss at Meridian Strategy Group called to congratulate her and offer her a senior position if she ever wanted to return. Charlie saw the article in his office. He was supposed to be preparing for a client meeting, but instead he found himself reading about his ex-wife with growing disbelief. This couldn't be the same woman who used to apologize for speaking too loudly. This couldn't be the person he'd convinced was too stupid for anything beyond managing a household. The photograph showed a stranger, confident, powerful, successful. The quotes revealed a mind he'd never bothered to recognize existed. His current fiancée, Brielle, walked into his office and saw the magazine. "Who's that?" "She's gorgeous." "Nobody," Charlie said too quickly, closing the magazine. "Nobody important." But Brielle picked it up, curious now. She read the article, her expression shifting. "Wait, is this your ex-wife? The one you said couldn't handle being married to someone successful?" She looked between Charlie and the photograph, and something clicked into place. "You told me she had a breakdown. You told me she wasn't capable of taking care of herself. But this woman seems extremely capable. Charlie, what really happened in your marriage?" "It's complicated," Charlie said, but his voice sounded hollow even to himself. "I'm sure it is," Brielle said coolly. She left the magazine on his desk and walked out. 2 days later, she broke off their engagement, telling him she'd realized she was dating someone who needed her to be small so he could feel large. The parallel to his speech about Lindsay wasn't lost on Charlie. The wound he'd inflicted on one woman had somehow circled back to cut him too. Garrett called Lindsay the day after the article came out. "Have you seen the reaction? Everyone's talking about it. You're becoming famous in our field." "I don't want to be famous," Lindsay said. "I just want to do good work." "Well, you're doing both. Also, Charlie saw it. I heard from some mutual friends that his engagement fell apart after his fiancée read your article." Lindsay felt nothing about this information except mild pity. "I hope he finds someone who makes him want to be better. I genuinely mean that." "You've changed so much," Garrett said with wonder in his voice. "The woman who walked out of that hotel wouldn't have been able to say that." "The woman who walked out of that hotel was barely holding herself together," Lindsay corrected. "This woman knows her worth isn't determined by Charlie's capacity to see it. That's the difference." That evening, Harrison asked Lindsay to dinner, not at a restaurant this time, but at his home. She arrived to find he'd cooked, something simple, but thoughtful, and they ate on his terrace overlooking the city. As the sun set, painting everything in shades of amber and rose, Harrison finally said what they'd both been avoiding. "Lindsay, I need to be honest with you about something. This stopped being purely professional for me months ago. I wake up thinking about our conversations. I read something interesting and immediately want to share it with you. I watch you solve impossible problems, and I'm in awe. I'm falling in love with you, and I need you to know that so you can decide what you want to do with that information. If you only want to work together, I'll respect that boundary, but I had to tell you the truth." Lindsay set down her wine glass carefully. Her heart was racing, but not with fear, with possibility. "I'm terrified," she said honestly. "My marriage taught me that giving someone your heart means giving them the power to destroy you. But you're not Charlie. You've proven that every single day. You see me, you celebrate me, you treat me like an equal. I think I'm falling in love with you too, Harrison. And that scares me more than anything I've ever done." "Then let's be scared. Together," Harrison said, reaching across the table to take her hand. "We'll go as slowly as you need. I'm not going anywhere." He kissed her hand, and Lindsay felt something unlock in her chest. The last door she'd been keeping closed. The final wall she'd built around her heart. She'd spent so long protecting herself that she'd almost forgotten what it felt like to let someone in. But Harrison wasn't asking her to be smaller or quieter or less. He was asking her to be everything she was, with someone who would celebrate rather than diminish it. But over the following weeks, Lindsay began to notice something. Harrison would make plans with her, then cancel at the last minute for work emergencies. He'd promised to leave the office early and show up 3 hours late. During dinners, his phone would buzz constantly, and though he tried to ignore it, she could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his attention drifted. He was present physically, but somewhere else, mentally. One evening, after he'd cancelled their third date in 2 weeks, Lindsay sat him down. "Harrison, talk to me. What's happening?" He looked exhausted, older than usual. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted quietly. "After Catherine died, I threw myself into work because it was the only thing that didn't hurt. For 5 years, the company has been my entire life. And now you're here, and I want this, I want us, but I don't know how to stop. I schedule time with you and then convince myself that one more meeting, one more deal, one more problem won't matter. But it does matter. You matter. And I'm terrified I'm going to lose you because I don't know how to be a person who isn't working." Lindsay's heart ached for him, but she also knew she couldn't be with someone who was half present. "I understand grief," she said gently. "I understand using work to avoid pain. But Harrison, I can't build a relationship with someone who's never actually there. I won't be an afterthought, not even to someone I'm falling in love with. I've already been with someone who made me feel like I didn't matter. I won't do that again, even if the reason is different." Harrison looked stricken. "You're right. God, you're completely right. What do I do?" "You decide what you want. And if you want this, you figure out how to make space for it. Not someday, not when work calms down, but now." It took Harrison 2 weeks of genuine struggle. He hired an additional executive to share the workload. He set boundaries on his availability. He turned off his phone during their dinners and actually turned it off, not just silenced it. It wasn't perfect. He still sometimes caught himself checking emails compulsively, still had to actively remind himself that not every problem required his immediate attention. But he was trying, genuinely trying, and that made all the difference. "Thank you," he told Lindsay one evening, "for not accepting half of me, for demanding that I be fully present. Catherine used to tell me I was married to my work, and I always told her she was exaggerating. She wasn't. You've made me face something I've been avoiding for years." "Slowly," she agreed. "But yes." They sat there as night fell over the city, 2 people who'd survived loss and betrayal, choosing to be brave enough to try again. And Lindsay realized that this moment of choosing love despite fear, of trusting despite every reason not to, was its own kind of revolution. She'd rebuilt herself from ruins. Now she was learning to share that rebuilt self with someone who deserved it. Chapter 5. The Queen's Gambit. Some women spend their lives seeking validation from people who will never give it. Lindsay Lamb had stopped seeking and started building, and in doing so became more powerful than anyone who'd ever doubted her. Harrison courted Lindsay like she was something precious and rare, which was exactly how he saw her. Their relationship unfolded slowly, carefully, with the patience of two people who'd both learned that rushing toward intimacy often meant running from something else. He asked permission before holding her hand. He listened to her stories about Charlie, not to rescue her from them, but to understand where she'd been so he could honor where she was now. When she talked about her fears of being diminished again, he didn't dismiss them with promises. He showed her through consistent action that he meant what he said. They kept their relationship private at first, both wanting to protect something fragile and new from outside scrutiny. But within Vale Enterprises, Lindsay's influence continued to expand in ways that had nothing to do with who she was dating. Harrison promoted her to Chief Strategic Officer after she'd transformed 3 failing divisions, exposed systematic corruption, and increased overall profitability while making Vale Enterprises a place people actually wanted to work. The promotion came with a corner office, authority over every major decision the company made, and a salary that made Lindsay's eyes water when she saw the offer letter. "This is too much," she told Harrison when he presented the contract. "It's exactly what you're worth," he replied firmly. "I've been underpaying you, if anything. You've earned this 10 times over." Some questioned whether her relationship with Harrison influenced the promotion, but her track record spoke louder than speculation. She'd rebuilt departments from the ground up, created systems that protected employees from abuse, and turned Vale Enterprises into a model that other companies studied and tried to replicate. Her methods remained the same. She listened to the people everyone else ignored. She asked uncomfortable questions, and she refused to protect powerful people who created toxic environments. Word spread beyond Vale. Companies started calling, offering her astronomical sums to consult for them. Universities invited her to speak. She was featured in 2 more major publications, both times photographed looking calm and confident, speaking about rebuilding organizations from the ground up. Each article generated more attention, more opportunities, more recognition that she was someone whose ideas mattered. The invitation to keynote the National Leadership Summit arrived on a Tuesday morning. Lindsay stared at the email, barely breathing. The summit was where the most influential voices in organizational leadership gathered. Being asked to keynote meant being recognized as someone whose ideas shaped the field. She called Sienna first, her hands shaking. "They want me to speak at the National Leadership Summit," Lindsay said. "Of course they do," Sienna replied, and Lindsay could hear the smile in her voice. "You're brilliant. When are you going to start believing that?" "I'm working on it. Every single day, I'm working on it." Preparing the keynote took weeks. Lindsay wrote and rewrote, trying to distill everything she'd learned into something that would resonate. Harrison read her drafts, offering feedback that sharpened her arguments without changing her voice. The night before the summit, he found her pacing their hotel room, terrified. "What if I'm not ready? What if everything I have to say is too personal, too raw? What if people think I'm just bitter about my divorce?" Harrison took her hands, stopping her movement. "Lindsay, your power comes from the fact that it's personal and raw. You're not speaking from theory. You're speaking from survival and transformation. That's what people need to hear." The summit ballroom held over 1,000 people. Lindsay stood backstage, listening to the introduction that listed her accomplishments in a voice that made them sound more impressive than she felt. When she walked onto that stage, the lights were blinding, but she found her center and began. "I want to tell you about the worst night of my life," she started, her voice carrying to the back of the room. "The night my husband stood up in front of 100 people and announced that our marriage would probably last another year at most because I wasn't on his level. He said this while I sat there, surrounded by people who laughed at his honesty. I went home that night believing he was right, that I was worthless, incapable, fundamentally less than. But then I did something that changed everything. I left." She spoke for 40 minutes about toxic systems, about how cruelty masquerades as honesty, about the economic and human cost of protecting people who destroy others. She talked about rebuilding both herself and organizations from foundations of respect rather than fear. She shared specific strategies, real examples from her work at Vale, vulnerable truths about her journey. The audience was silent, riveted. When she finished, they rose to their feet. The applause went on for so long that Lindsay felt tears threatening. She held them back, smiled, and walked off that stage, knowing she'd just shifted something fundamental in how people thought about leadership. In the audience, though Lindsay didn't see them, sat several people from Charlie's world. His former colleagues from Hartwell and Associates, people who'd been at that birthday party 3 years ago, witnessed her transformation into someone they barely recognized. One of them, Lawrence Finch, turned to his companion and said quietly, "We destroyed that woman, and she became this." What does that say about us? After the keynote, reporters wanted interviews. Conference attendees wanted photographs and advice. But Lindsay found Harrison waiting for her backstage, and the look on his face told her everything she needed to know. "That was the most powerful thing I've ever witnessed," he said quietly, pulling her into his arms. "You just changed 1,000 people's understanding of leadership. Do you know that?" "I just told the truth." That's exactly why it was powerful. That evening at the summit dinner, Lindsay was seated at a table with executives from companies across the country. They asked her questions, sought her advice, treated her like the expert she'd become. At one point, someone mentioned reading about her transformation of Vale Enterprises and asked Harrison what it was like working with her. Working with her? Harrison smiled, and Lindsay felt warmth spread through her chest at his expression. "I don't work with Lindsay. I learn from her. She's the smartest person I know, and I'm grateful every day that she chose to build something with me." The person asking the question looked between them, understanding dawning. "Oh, you two are together." "We are," Harrison confirmed without hesitation. "And before you ask, no, that's not why she has her position. She earned that before we ever became involved. I'm just lucky enough to witness her brilliance up close every day." Charlie had never once spoken about her with pride, not in 3 years of marriage. Harrison did it naturally, publicly, without her asking. The difference was staggering. Later that night, in their hotel room overlooking the city, Harrison pulled out a small velvet box. Lindsay's breath caught, her heart suddenly racing. "I know it's fast," he said, his voice gentle. "I know you're still healing from what he did to you. But I also know that I want to spend the rest of my life with someone who makes me better every single day. Someone who challenges me and inspires me and reminds me that love doesn't have to hurt. Lindsay Lamb, would you marry me?" Lindsay looked at this man who saw her completely, who celebrated her strength instead of fearing it, who'd proven through consistent action that love didn't have to be a weapon. She thought about the woman who'd walked out of the Belmont Hotel believing she was nothing. She thought about how far she'd come, how much she'd built, how thoroughly she'd proven Charlie Dean wrong about everything. "Yes," she said, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, Harrison, I'll marry me." He slipped the ring on her finger, simple, elegant, perfect, and kissed her with a tenderness that made her believe in second chances. Not second chances with the person who hurt you, but second chances at building something real with someone who actually deserves your heart. The announcement appeared in the business section the following week. Lindsay Lamb, Chief Strategic Officer of Vale Enterprises, to wed company founder Harrison Vale. The article mentioned her keynote at the summit, her revolutionary work in organizational culture, her influence on modern leadership philosophy. It included a photo of them together at a charity event, looking at each other with obvious affection and respect. Charlie saw it in his lawyer's office, where he was meeting about an entirely different matter. He asked to use the restroom and locked himself in, staring at the announcement until the words blurred. She was marrying Harrison Vale. Harrison Vale, who Charlie had met once at a conference and found intimidating in his quiet competence and genuine decency. Harrison Vale, who was everything Charlie had pretended to be, actually successful, actually respected, actually kind. The woman in the photo didn't look anything like the Lindsay he'd known. This woman looked happy, actually, genuinely happy in a way she never had with him, not even in the beginning, when he'd still been pretending to be someone worth loving. Charlie realized with sickening clarity that he'd never once made her smile the way she was smiling in that photograph. He'd spent 3 years tearing her down, and she'd spent the years since proving that everything he'd said about her was a lie he'd told himself to feel superior. Chapter 6. The Reckoning Begins. Ghosts don't haunt houses. They haunt the minds of people who never apologized for what they did in the light of day. Charlie's life was unraveling in ways he couldn't ignore anymore. Brielle had broken their engagement after reading Lindsay's article, telling him she'd finally recognized that she was dating someone who needed her to be small so he could feel large. The women he'd dated since kept leaving for the same reason, each one articulating what the others had felt. They were tired of being measured against impossible standards, tired of feeling like they were auditioning for a role they'd never be good enough to play, tired of conversations that felt like tests they didn't know they were taking. His friendships were dissolving too. Garrett barely spoke to him anymore, too busy building a life with Faye and maintaining his friendship with Lindsay. Other friends from that birthday party had distanced themselves, some because they'd seen Lindsay's rise and felt ashamed of their laughter, others because they'd started recognizing Charlie's behavior in themselves and didn't like what they saw. His work was suffering. He couldn't focus on cases, couldn't summon the arrogance that had once passed for confidence. Colleagues avoided him. His reputation had been quietly damaged by the Leadership Quarterly article that, while not naming him, had been transparent enough that people in their field knew exactly who Lindsay's ex-husband was. He'd become a cautionary tale. Then came the dinner party. Moira was hosting a fundraiser for a charity board she served on, and Harrison Vale was a major donor to the cause. When Moira learned Harrison would be attending and likely bringing Lindsay, she insisted Charlie come too. "You need to start rebuilding your social connections," she said over the phone. "Besides, it's time you saw Lindsay again. You can't avoid her forever." "I don't think that's a good idea, Mother. Life is full of uncomfortable moments, Charlie. It's time you learn to sit with them instead of running away." The evening of the party, Charlie arrived at his mother's estate feeling like he was walking toward his own execution. The house was filled with the kind of people Moira collected, wealthy, influential, impeccably dressed, discussing their vacation homes and their children's achievements. He accepted a drink from a server and tried to make conversation, but his attention kept drifting to the door, dreading and anticipating in equal measure. When Lindsay arrived on Harrison's arm, Charlie's breath caught. She wore a deep blue dress that was elegant without being ostentatious, her hair styled in a way that framed her face beautifully. But it wasn't her appearance that struck him, it was her presence. She moved through the room like she belonged anywhere she chose to be, greeting people with genuine warmth and confidence, laughing at something Harrison whispered to her, touching his arm with casual intimacy. Moira rushed to greet them, her demeanor completely transformed from how she'd treated Lindsay during the marriage. "Harrison, Lindsay, how wonderful to see you both. Lindsay, you look absolutely radiant. Congratulations on your engagement. We're all so proud of your success." Lindsay's smile was polite but distant, professional. "Thank you, Moira, that's kind of you to say." "You know, I always knew you had potential," Moira continued, and Charlie wanted to sink through the floor. "I told Charlie just the other day that you've exceeded everyone's expectations. You've become quite remarkable." "Not everyone's expectations," Lindsay said quietly, her eyes meeting Moira's with perfect clarity. "Some people's expectations of me were always quite low. If you'll excuse us, I'd like to introduce Harrison to the Jeffersons. I believe they share your interest in environmental conservation." She moved away smoothly, leaving Moira standing there with her false smile frozen in place. Charlie watched his mother's face crumble slightly, reality cracking through her delusion that she could rewrite history with a few compliments. Throughout dinner, Charlie couldn't stop watching Lindsay. She conversed easily about housing policy, environmental initiatives, education reform, her intelligence obvious to everyone at the table. She told a story about restructuring a department that had everyone laughing, her timing perfect, her self-deprecating humor balanced with quiet confidence. Harrison looked at her constantly, his hand occasionally touching her shoulder, his entire face softening when she spoke. The love between them was palpable, comfortable, the kind of partnership Charlie had never understood how to create. After dinner, guests mingled in the various rooms of the estate. Charlie found himself in the hallway at the same time as Lindsay, coming from opposite directions. She was returning from the restroom and they nearly collided. For a moment, they stood frozen, face to face for the first time since the divorce was finalized. "Lindsay," he managed, his voice catching. "You look well. Congratulations on everything. Your engagement, your success, all of it. You've accomplished so much." "Thank you, Charlie. I hope you're well too." Her voice was cordial but empty of emotion, like she was speaking to a distant acquaintance from college whose name she barely remembered. The indifference was more devastating than anger would have been. He could have handled anger. Anger meant he still mattered enough to generate feeling. This polite distance meant he'd become irrelevant. "Could we talk?" he asked, desperation creeping into his voice. "Maybe have coffee sometime? I'd like to apologize properly, to explain—" "I don't think we have anything to discuss," Lindsay interrupted gently but firmly. "Whatever needed to be said was said a long time ago. I've moved on, Charlie. I genuinely hope you can too." She started to walk past him, but he caught her arm without thinking. "Please, just 5 minutes. I need you to know that I understand now what I did. How wrong I was about everything. Let go of my arm." Lindsay's voice was still quiet, but with steel underneath. A core of strength he'd tried so hard to crush and failed completely to break. Charlie released her immediately, horrified at himself. Harrison appeared at the end of the hallway, his posture protective but not aggressive, giving Lindsay space to handle the situation herself. "Everything all right?" Harrison asked, looking at Lindsay, not Charlie. "Fine," she said, taking Harrison's hand naturally, comfortably. "We're finished here." They walked away together, and Charlie stood alone in that hallway, watching them leave. He heard Harrison ask quietly, "Are you okay?" And Lindsay's response, clear and certain, "I'm perfect. He can't touch me anymore." Charlie realized with crushing finality that she meant it literally. He couldn't touch her, not her happiness, not her success, not her sense of self-worth. Everything he'd tried to destroy, she'd rebuilt stronger. And she'd done it so thoroughly that his presence in her life now registered as nothing more than a minor inconvenience, something to be politely navigated and then forgotten. He left the party early, unable to bear another moment of watching her be happy with someone else, someone better. He drove aimlessly through the city for hours, unable to go home to his empty apartment where every surface reminded him of choices he couldn't undo. He ended up at Garrett's house near midnight, standing on the doorstep like a ghost. Garrett answered in pajamas, surprised but not unkind. He looked at Charlie's face and sighed. "I saw her tonight," Charlie said, his voice breaking. "I saw what I destroyed, and I saw what she became anyway, despite everything I did to her. Garrett, I don't know how to live with what I've done." Garrett studied his old friend, seeing the cracks in his facade, the real pain beneath the arrogance. "Come in, we need to talk." Chapter 7, The Fortress and the Siege. Some men don't realize what they had until they see someone else cherishing it the way they should have all along. Garrett's living room was warm and lived in, the kind of space that reflected an actual life being built rather than an image being maintained. Charlie sat on the couch while Garrett made coffee. Neither of them would drink, both needing the ritual of hospitality to soften what was coming. When Garrett returned and settled into the armchair across from him, the silence stretched between them, like a bridge neither wanted to cross first. "Talk to me," Garrett finally said. "Really talk to me. Not the version you tell yourself to sleep at night, but the truth." Charlie's hands shook as he tried to find words. "I destroyed the best thing that ever happened to me. I spent 3 years systematically breaking down someone who loved me, someone who only wanted to be my partner, and I convinced myself I was being honest when I was really just being cruel. And now she's happy, actually genuinely happy, with someone who sees everything I was too blind and stupid to recognize." "Why did you do it?" Garrett asked. "Not the surface reasons, the real ones. Why did you need to make her small?" The question landed like a punch. Charlie sat with it, really sat with it, trying to excavate something true from the layers of justification he'd built. "Because she threatened me," he finally admitted. "Not intentionally, but just by existing. She was smart, Garrett. Really smart. She saw things I missed, made connections I couldn't make, had insights that were better than mine. And instead of celebrating that, instead of learning from her, I panicked. Because my whole life, my whole sense of worth, was built on being smarter than everyone else. That's what my mother taught me, that I was special, superior, destined for greatness because of my education and breeding. And then I married someone who made me feel ordinary by comparison, and I couldn't handle it." "So you destroyed her to protect your ego?" "Yes." The admission felt like swallowing glass. I'd told myself I was helping her understand her limitations, that I was being realistic about her capabilities. But I was just terrified that if she reached her potential, she'd realize she didn't need me. Or worse, that she was better than me. Garrett leaned forward, his expression hard. "Do you know what I watched for 3 years? I watched you take a confident, ambitious woman and turn her into someone who apologized for breathing too loudly. I watched you mock her in front of our friends, dismiss her ideas, make her feel worthless. And I said nothing because I was a coward who valued our friendship more than her dignity. That's something I have to live with. Why are you telling me this now? Because you need to understand the magnitude of what you did. You didn't just hurt Lindsay. You damaged something fundamental in her, made her question her own reality, stole years of her life that she spent believing your lies about who she was. And the miracle isn't that she left you. The miracle is that she survived you." Charlie felt tears burning his eyes. "How do I fix it? How do I make amends?" "You don't," Garrett said bluntly. "That's what you're not understanding. There is no fixing this. Lindsay has moved on, built an extraordinary life, found someone who actually deserves her. Your amends aren't about getting her back, or even getting her forgiveness. Your amends are about becoming someone who never hurts another person the way you hurt her." "I don't know how to do that." "Then you figure it out. You get professional help. Real help, not just a few therapy sessions to check a box. You do the deep, uncomfortable work of understanding why you are the way you are. You make amends to every other woman you've hurt. And Charlie, we both know Lindsay wasn't the only one. You become someone fundamentally different, not because it might win you anything, but because it's the right thing to do." Faye appeared in the doorway, having clearly been listening. She looked at Charlie with something between pity and disgust. "My fiancé told me what you did to your wife. What kind of man publicly humiliates the woman who loves him? What kind of man spends 3 years systematically destroying someone's confidence? You know what the worst part is? You're not even an exception. You're just the rule that women have been living with forever. Men who need us to be less so, they can feel like more." Her words hit Charlie like a slap, but he couldn't argue with them. She was right, about all of it. "I'm sorry," he said, though the words felt inadequate. "I'm so sorry." "Don't apologize to us," Faye said. "We're not the ones you destroyed. And don't apologize to Lindsay either, because she doesn't need your apology. She's moved beyond needing anything from you. If you're truly sorry, prove it by changing so completely that the man you were becomes unrecognizable." Charlie left Garrett's house in the early morning hours with a clarity that felt like looking at himself through clean glass for the first time. He was a monster. Not a dramatic villain, but something more insidious, an ordinary man who'd been taught that his comfort mattered more than other people's humanity, and who'd built a life on that poisonous foundation. The next day, he found a therapist who specialized in narcissistic personality patterns and abusive relationship dynamics. The woman who interviewed him initially was skeptical. "Why are you here?" she asked. "What do you hope to get from therapy?" "I need to understand why I destroyed someone I claimed to love, and I need to become someone who never does that again. Not to win her back. She's gone. She's happy with someone better than me. This is about me becoming someone I can actually respect." The therapist studied him for a long moment. "All right, but I need you to understand that this work is going to be painful. You're going to have to confront things about yourself that you've been avoiding your whole life. You're going to have to take accountability for damage you can never undo. Are you prepared for that?" "I don't know, but I have to try." While Charlie began the slow, unglamorous work of examining his own toxicity, Lindsay's life continued to soar. She and Harrison planned their wedding, an intimate ceremony at his estate with just family and close friends. No grand spectacle, no society pages, just a celebration of two people choosing each other with clear eyes and full hearts. Sienna was one of her attendants, the two of them having traveled so far together from the women Charlie had tried to break. "You know what's beautiful?" Sienna said as they were looking at venues. "We both survived him. We both rebuilt. And now we get to witness each other thriving. That feels like the best revenge." "It's not revenge," Lindsay corrected gently. "Revenge would mean I still cared what he thought. This is just me living the life I was always supposed to have." Harrison's children, Kendall and Malcolm, embraced Lindsay completely. Kendall, a surgeon with her father's quiet intensity, told Lindsay over coffee one afternoon, "You make my father laugh again. After Mom died, I thought he'd forgotten how. Thank you for reminding him that joy is still possible." Malcolm, who worked in environmental law, was more direct. "He talks about you constantly. Your ideas, your insights, the way you see the world. I've never heard him speak about anyone with such respect, not even Mom, and he adored her. You're exactly who he needs." The wedding took place on a perfect autumn evening, the estate gardens lit with soft lights. The guest list carefully curated to include only people who genuinely loved and supported them. Lindsay wore a simple, elegant gown that made her feel like herself, rather than someone else's idea of a bride. When her father walked her down the aisle, he whispered, "Your mama is watching, baby girl. She's so proud of you." Harrison stood at the altar, and when he saw Lindsay walking toward him, tears streamed down his face without shame. When they reached each other, he took her hands and said quietly, just for her, "You're the most beautiful thing I've ever seen, and I'm the luckiest man alive." Their vows were personal and powerful. Harrison promised to celebrate her brilliance, to support her dreams, to be her partner in everything, to never make her feel small for his comfort. Lindsay promised to trust him with her heart, to build an empire with him, to never be less than everything she was, to choose him every day with intention and joy. When they kissed, the gathered guests erupted in applause. Garrett was there with Faye, clapping with genuine happiness for his friend's triumph. Sienna was there with her new partner, crying happy tears. Harrison's children stood and cheered for their father's second chance at love. The reception was joyful and warm, speeches filled with laughter and affection. Harrison's toast to his new wife made everyone cry. Lindsay walked into my life at exactly the moment I'd convinced myself that my best days were behind me. She proved me wrong about that and about 1,000 other things. She's the smartest person I know, the kindest person I know, and the strongest person I know. I promise to spend the rest of my life deserving the gift of her choosing me. Lindsay's toast was shorter, but no less powerful. I'd learned the hard way that the right person doesn't make you smaller to fit their life. They expand their life to make room for all of you. Harrison does that every single day. Thank you all for celebrating this journey with us, and for believing that second chances are real. As they danced their first dance, Lindsay looked up at her husband and felt something she'd never experienced with Charlie: complete safety, absolute trust, the certainty that this man saw her and loved her exactly as she was. "Thank you," she whispered against his chest. "For what?" "For proving that love doesn't have to hurt." Across town, Charlie sat in his apartment, deliberately not looking at social media, where he knew wedding photos would be appearing. He'd been in therapy twice a week for months now, slowly beginning to understand the architecture of his own cruelty. His therapist had asked him to make a list of every cruel thing he'd done to Lindsay, every way he'd diminished her, every moment he'd chosen to hurt her. The list was pages long, and reading it made him physically ill. But he kept going back to therapy. He kept doing the work, not because it would win him anything, but because Faye had been right. If he was truly sorry, he needed to prove it by changing so completely that the man who'd mocked his wife in front of 100 people became someone he could barely recognize. His mother called him that evening. "I heard the wedding was beautiful. Several of my friends attended. They said Lindsay looked radiant, and that Harrison clearly adores her." "Good," Charlie said, and meant it. "She deserves to be adored. She deserved it from me, and I gave her the opposite. I'm glad she found someone who sees her worth." Moira was quiet for a long moment. "Charlie, I owe you an apology. I raised you to be arrogant. I taught you that your education and breeding made you superior to others. I made you into someone who could only feel valuable by making others feel worthless. I did that to you, and I'm sorry." It was the first time his mother had ever apologized to him for anything. Charlie felt something crack open in his chest. "We both have a lot to make up for, Mother. Maybe we can figure out how to do that together." Chapter 8. The Empire of Self. Lindsay had spent 3 years learning to be small. She would spend the rest of her life remembering how to be infinite. The honeymoon took them to places Lindsay had only dreamed of visiting: Barcelona, Rome, Santorini. But what she remembered most wasn't the architecture or the food or the stunning views. It was the feeling of walking through ancient streets with someone who treated her like she was the most fascinating person in every room, who asked her opinions on everything, who listened when she spoke and built on her ideas rather than dismissing them. Harrison was a partner in the truest sense, and being married to him felt like finally breathing freely after years of holding her breath. When they returned, Lindsay threw herself back into her work with renewed energy. Vale Enterprises was thriving under her strategic direction, but she'd been considering something bigger, something entirely her own. Over coffee one morning, she mentioned it to Harrison almost casually. "I've been thinking about starting my own consulting firm, specializing in helping organizations identify and eliminate toxic cultures. I'd still be involved with Vale, but this would be mine, my name, my vision, my legacy." Harrison set down his coffee cup and looked at her with that expression she'd come to know meant he was taking her completely seriously. "Tell me more. What would make this different from what you do now?" "Scale and focus. I'd work exclusively with companies committed to real change, not just cosmetic improvements. I'd build a team of consultants who understand dysfunction from the inside because they've survived it. We'd create a model that other firms could follow. And I'd use part of the profits to fund a foundation helping women rebuild their lives after leaving toxic situations, providing training, seed money, mentorship." "How much would you need to start?" Lindsay had done the projections, worked out every detail in the months before the wedding when she couldn't sleep. Initial investment would be substantial. Office space, staff salaries, marketing, legal fees. I'd need to give up my salary for at least the first year while we build the client base. It's risky, and I understand if you think... Harrison interrupted her by pulling out his phone and making a call. "Dennis? Harrison Vale. I need you to draft paperwork for a new company. Owner and CEO will be Lindsay Vale, formerly Lamb. She'll be in touch with details." He ended the call and looked at Lindsay. "What are you calling it?" "You just what?" "I just told my attorney to start the paperwork." "What's the company name?" Lindsay felt tears threatening. Harrison, this is a huge financial risk. You can't just... Lindsay, listen to me carefully. You've made Vale Enterprises more profitable than it's been in its entire history. You've transformed how we operate, how we treat people, how we think about success. You've more than earned the right to build something of your own, and I have complete faith in your ability to make it successful. This isn't charity or a gift. This is an investment in someone whose judgment and capability I trust absolutely. Now, what are you calling the company? Rebuild Consulting. The tagline is building better from broken. Perfect. When do you want to start? Within 6 months, Rebuild Consulting occupied a floor in downtown offices with a team of 12 consultants, all of them people who'd experienced or witnessed workplace toxicity and wanted to help others escape it. Lindsay hired women who'd been pushed out of other firms for speaking up about harassment. She hired people whose unconventional backgrounds meant traditional consulting companies had overlooked them. She built a team that reflected her values and her vision. The clients came faster than anticipated. Companies that had read about Lindsay's work at Vale, that had heard her speak at conferences, that wanted what she'd created for themselves. Within the first year, Rebuild Consulting had worked with 15 major organizations, and every single one showed measurable improvements in employee retention, productivity, and satisfaction. Lindsay's methods worked because they were honest. She didn't paper over problems or protect powerful people who created them. She went into companies and told them the truth, even when that truth was uncomfortable. The foundation launched simultaneously. Second chances, economic empowerment for women in transition provided everything Lindsay wished had existed when she left Charlie. Training, seed funding for startups, mentorship from successful women, psychological support for healing from abuse. The first cohort was 10 women. Within 2 years, it would be helping over 100 annually, with a success rate that made traditional programs look inadequate by comparison. Lindsay was featured on the cover of Business Leadership Review with the headline, "The Woman, Rebuilding Corporate America. One Honest Conversation at a Time." The article detailed her journey from abused wife to influential consultant, from broken to unbreakable. It included interviews with employees whose lives she'd changed, companies she'd transformed, women she'd helped rebuild. The piece went viral, shared across social media, discussed in boardrooms and graduate programs. Charlie saw it in his dentist's office. He'd been avoiding anything related to Lindsay, trying to focus on his own healing. But the magazine was there on the table, and his name, his real name, no euphemisms, appeared in the article. Lindsay had spoken openly about her marriage, about the systematic cruelty she'd endured, about walking out with nothing and building everything. She'd named him as a cautionary tale about what happens when we protect toxic people instead of their victims. He read it sitting in that waiting room, his hands shaking, people around him going about their normal days while his world tilted sideways. The woman in the cover photo bore almost no resemblance to the person he'd married. Not because she looked so different physically, but because the confidence radiating from her was impossible to reconcile with the woman who used to flinch when he raised his voice. His current girlfriend, Ruth, found him that evening staring at the article on his laptop. She was a social worker who'd been patient with his therapy, his ongoing struggle to unlearn the patterns that had defined him. She read over his shoulder, then sat beside him quietly. "She's extraordinary," Ruth said finally, "and she became that despite you actively trying to prevent it. That's almost more impressive than if you'd supported her. She had to fight through your cruelty to get there." "I know. Do you? Do you really understand what you tried to destroy?" Charlie looked at Ruth, this kind woman who'd taken a chance on someone damaged and damaging. "I understand that I spent 3 years trying to convince someone brilliant that she was stupid, someone capable that she was worthless, someone deserving of love that she was lucky I tolerated her. I understand that I'm a person who could do that to someone who never did anything except love me. And I understand that I have to live with that for the rest of my life. What are you going to do with that understanding? It was the right question. Understanding without action was just another form of self-indulgence. Charlie had been in therapy for over a year now, slowly excavating the root systems of his cruelty, understanding how his mother's teachings and his own insecurities had combined to create someone capable of systematic emotional abuse. But understanding wasn't enough. "I'm going to write her a letter," he said, "not asking for forgiveness or reconciliation, just taking full accountability for what I did, acknowledging her truth, and telling her that I hope her life continues to be everything she's built it to be. And then I'm going to volunteer with organizations that help victims of abuse, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to undo a fraction of the damage I've done to the world." Ruth studied him carefully. "Don't send the letter unless you're sure it's for her benefit, not yours. Sometimes the kindest thing we can do for people we've hurt is leave them alone." She was right, and Charlie knew it. He wrote the letter anyway. Pages and pages of acknowledgement, accountability, apology without excuse. He gave it to Garrett to hold, asking him to deliver it only if Garrett believed it wouldn't hurt Lindsay to receive it. Garrett read it, saw that it was genuine, and kept it for months. Finally, when Lindsay seemed so secure in her happiness that nothing from her past could shake her, he gave it to her with a warning. "Charlie wrote this. It's not asking for anything, but you don't have to read it if you don't want to. I can destroy it right now." Lindsay took the letter and read it alone in her office one evening after everyone else had gone home. She read Charlie's detailed accounting of every cruel thing he'd done, his acknowledgement that he'd tried to destroy her because her potential threatened his ego, his understanding that no apology could undo the damage, his hope that she continued to thrive. The letter ended simply, "You were always extraordinary. I was just too broken and threatened to see it. I'm glad you found someone who sees you clearly. You deserve everything beautiful." When Harrison came home that night, he found Lindsay on their terrace, the letter beside her, tears on her face. "Are you all right?" he asked, sitting beside her and pulling her close. "I'm perfect," she said honestly. "Charlie finally understands what he did. He took real accountability. And you know what's strange? I feel nothing about it except maybe hope that he becomes someone better. His understanding or his apology doesn't change my past or my present. I'm happy. Actually, genuinely happy. His redemption or lack of it is completely irrelevant to my life now. That's because you've transcended him," Harrison said quietly. "You built something so magnificent that his opinion became background noise." Lindsay leaned into her husband's embrace and realized he was right. She'd spent years worried that running into Charlie would undo her healing, that his words could still wound her, that some part of her would always be the woman sitting in that hotel ballroom being humiliated. But she'd been wrong. That woman was gone, transformed, replaced by someone who knew her own worth so deeply that no one else's assessment could shake it. Chapter 9. The Final Siege. Some men mistake persistence for love, never understanding that real love knows when to let go. The Women's Economic Empowerment Summit was the largest gathering of its kind, bringing together thousands of women from across the country who were rebuilding their lives after leaving toxic situations. Lindsay had been asked to deliver the closing keynote, the culminating speech that would send attendees home inspired and equipped to continue their journeys. She'd spent weeks preparing, wanting to honor the courage of every woman in that auditorium who'd chosen herself over comfortable suffering. Harrison sat in the front row, as he always did when she spoke publicly, his face radiating pride. Beside him sat Sienna, now a successful attorney specializing in employment discrimination cases. Garrett and Faye were there, along with Kendall and Malcolm. The auditorium held 3,000 people, and every seat was filled with women who'd survived what Lindsay had survived. who understood the particular courage it took to walk away from someone who'd convinced you that you were nothing. Lindsay walked onto that stage and looked out at the sea of faces, seeing herself reflected in every single one of them. She began without preamble, her voice strong and clear. 7 years ago, I sat in a hotel ballroom while my husband told a room full of people that our marriage probably wouldn't last another year because I wasn't on his level. He said I was intellectually inferior, socially inadequate, fundamentally less than. And I believed him. For 3 years of marriage, I'd been trained to believe that his assessment of my worth was more accurate than my own. But that night, something inside me broke in a way that set me free instead of destroying me. I stood up, told him we didn't need to wait a year, and I walked out. The auditorium was silent except for the sound of 3,000 women breathing together, holding space for this story they all knew versions of. The years that followed were the hardest of my life. I worked 2 jobs while going to school at night. I lived in apartments where I could hear my neighbors fighting through thin walls. I ate meals that cost less than the coffee I used to buy without thinking. I cried myself to sleep, wondering if he was right about me, if I'd made a terrible mistake leaving the security of marriage for the uncertainty of starting over. But I kept going. I kept building. I kept proving to myself that I was more than his cruelty had tried to make me. She spoke for 40 minutes about the specifics of rebuilding, the practical steps, the emotional work, the setbacks and victories. She talked about founding Rebuild Consulting and the Foundation, about helping other women find their power, about learning that success wasn't about proving anyone wrong, but about building something so true to yourself that others' opinions became irrelevant. She spoke about Harrison, about learning to trust love again, about the difference between someone who diminishes you and someone who celebrates you. I'm not here to tell you that leaving is easy, she continued. I'm here to tell you that staying is harder. Staying costs you your sense of self, your dreams, your belief in your own worth. Leaving costs you comfort and certainty, but it gives you back your life. And let me be clear, you don't need permission to leave. You don't need a perfect plan. You don't need financial security or family support or the approval of people who've never lived your experience. You just need to understand one fundamental truth. You deserve better than someone who makes you feel small. You deserve better than relationships that require you to apologize for existing. You deserve everything beautiful, and the first step to getting it is walking away from everything ugly. The applause started before she finished her final sentence, building into a standing ovation that lasted so long, Lindsay had to wipe away tears. Women rushed the stage afterward, wanting to thank her, to share their stories, to tell her that her words had given them permission to finally leave, to finally believe they deserved more. What Lindsay didn't know was that Charlie was there. He'd seen the summit advertised and made a decision that his therapist had warned him might be unhealthy. He'd come to see what Lindsay had become, to witness from a distance the woman he'd tried to destroy. He sat in the very back row, having bought a ticket under a different name, and watched his ex-wife command a stage with the kind of presence he'd spent their entire marriage trying to suppress. When the keynote ended and crowds began dispersing, Charlie remained seated, paralyzed by the enormity of what he'd witnessed. He'd known intellectually that Lindsay had succeeded, but seeing her like this, powerful, luminous, changing lives with her words, made the reality of what he'd tried to destroy hit him with physical force. He sat there as the auditorium emptied, as cleanup crews began their work, as the lights dimmed. Security eventually approached him. "Sir, the event is over. You need to leave." Charlie stood, disoriented, and made his way to the exit. But as he walked through the corridor, he saw Lindsay ahead of him, talking with a small group of women, Harrison standing protectively nearby. Something in Charlie broke. He knew he should leave, knew his presence would only cause pain. But the need to speak to her one final time overwhelmed every rational thought. "Lindsay," he called out before he could stop himself. She turned, and her face went completely still when she saw him. The women around her stepped back instinctively. Harrison moved forward, placing himself slightly between Charlie and Lindsay, protective but not aggressive. "What are you doing here?" Lindsay asked, her voice carefully neutral. "I came to hear you speak. I needed to see what you'd become." Charlie's voice cracked. "Lindsay, I need to talk to you. Just 5 minutes, please." "Security," Harrison said quietly, but Lindsay touched his arm. "It's all right. 5 minutes. Here with Harrison present, and then you leave and never contact me again. That's the boundary." Charlie nodded, grateful and desperate. They moved to a quieter corner, Harrison standing close enough to intervene if needed, but far enough to give them space. Charlie looked at this woman he'd once shared a bed with, shared a life with, and barely recognized her, not because she looked so different, but because the fear that used to define her presence around him was completely absent. "I'm in therapy," he began. "Real therapy, multiple times a week, for over 2 years now. I've been working to understand why I am the way I am, why I needed to destroy you to feel powerful. I've made amends to other women I've hurt. I've volunteered with organizations that help abuse victims. I've tried to become someone fundamentally different than the man who stood up in that hotel ballroom and humiliated you." "Why are you telling me this?" Lindsay asked quietly. "Because you deserve to know that what you survived wasn't your fault, that you were never the problem, that everything I said about you was a lie. I told myself to justify my own cruelty. You were always brilliant, always capable, always more than enough. I was just too threatened and broken to see it." "I know that," Lindsay said simply. "I've known that for years. Your redemption or lack of it doesn't change my reality. I'm happy, Charlie. I built an extraordinary life. I found love with someone who actually deserves the title. I help women escape men like you. Your understanding of what you did is good for you and for the people in your life now, but it's irrelevant to mine." The words landed like blows, each one true and devastating. Charlie felt tears streaming down his face, all pretense stripped away. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm not asking for anything. I just needed you to know that you were right to leave, that everything you've accomplished proves how wrong I was about everything, and that I hope your life continues to be everything you've built it to be. Then I hope you continue getting help," Lindsay said, her voice softening slightly. "I hope you become someone who never hurts another person the way you hurt me and the others. I hope you build a good life, Charlie, but I hope you build it far away from me. This is the last time we'll speak. Do you understand?" "I understand." Lindsay looked at him for a long moment, and Charlie saw something in her eyes that felt like closure. "Goodbye, Charlie. I forgive you, not because you've earned it, but because holding on to anger would poison the beautiful life I've built. But forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation or relationship or room in my life for you. It just means I'm releasing the last chain connecting me to who I was when I knew you. I'm free. I've been free. And now you are too." She turned and walked away, taking Harrison's hand. Charlie watched them go, saw Harrison lean down to ask if she was okay, saw her nod and smile up at him with pure love. He watched until they disappeared around a corner, and then he stood there alone in that empty corridor, finally understanding that this was the ending he deserved. Not vindication or redemption or reunion, but the quiet dignity of being released from someone who'd outgrown needing anything from him. Chapter 10. The Restoration. Forgiveness isn't about forgetting. It's about refusing to let the past dictate who you become in the future. And Lindsay Lamb had spent 7 years becoming someone her younger self would never believe existed. 3 years after that final conversation with Charlie, Lindsay stood in the grand ballroom of a hotel, preparing to receive the National Leadership Award for Organizational Transformation. The ceremony honored individuals who'd fundamentally changed how American companies thought about culture, ethics, and human dignity in the workplace. Lindsay had accomplished more than most people did in entire lifetimes. Rebuild Consulting now had offices in 5 cities and had transformed over 200 organizations. Her foundation had helped nearly 500 women rebuild their lives, with a success rate that made national news. She published 2 books, both bestsellers. She'd been featured in countless articles, interviewed on major programs, invited to advise government committees on workplace reform. But what mattered most to her wasn't the accolades, it was the life she'd built with Harrison, the quiet joy of waking up beside someone who celebrated her rather than diminished her. The peace of knowing her worth wasn't contingent on anyone's approval. They'd created a partnership built on mutual respect and genuine affection, supporting each other's dreams while building something beautiful together. Harrison stood beside her now, devastatingly handsome in his tuxedo, his hand resting on the small of her back. "Nervous?" he asked, knowing she hated being the center of attention, despite having grown comfortable with public speaking. "A little. This feels big. It is big. You've earned every bit of it." He kissed her temple gently. "I'm so proud of you, it almost hurts." The ceremony began, and Lindsay watched as other honorees received their awards, each one having contributed something meaningful to their field. When her name was called, she walked onto that stage with her head high, accepting the Crystal Award and stepping to the microphone. She looked out at an audience of over 1,000 people, executives, consultants, activists, journalists, and felt the weight of how far she'd traveled. "When I was younger," she began, "I married someone who spent 3 years trying to convince me I was worthless. He mocked my education, dismissed my intelligence, made me believe that his cruelty was honesty and his contempt was realism. I left that marriage with nothing except my dignity and a stubborn refusal to believe his lies about who I was. Everything I've accomplished since then has been built on one simple foundation: the understanding that no one else's opinion of me matters more than my own. Not my ex-husband's, not my critics, not even my supporters. I know who I am. I know what I'm capable of. And I know that I deserve to take up space in this world without apologizing for it." She spoke for 10 minutes about the women who'd inspired her, the employees who'd trusted her, the organizations that had been brave enough to change. She thanked Harrison for being a partner who expanded his life to make room for all of her, rather than asking her to shrink. She thanked Sienna for surviving alongside her. She thanked everyone who'd believed in her vision of workplaces built on respect rather than fear. To every woman watching this who's being told she's not enough, you are. You've always been. The person telling you otherwise is lying to protect their own fragility. Walk away from anyone who requires you to be small for their comfort. Build something magnificent. Prove to yourself, not to them, that you were always capable of extraordinary things. And when you succeed, don't waste your energy on revenge. Just live so beautifully that their opinions become static. You can barely hear beneath the symphony of your own creation. The applause was deafening. Lindsay left that stage with her award, returning to Harrison's embrace, feeling utterly complete. Later that evening, at home in the sanctuary they'd built together, Lindsay stood on their terrace, looking out at the city lights. Harrison joined her, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "I'm thinking about the girl who walked out of the Belmont Hotel 7 years ago, believing she was nothing. I wish I could go back and tell her that she was about to become everything, that the pain was temporary, but the strength would be permanent, that she'd find love that felt safe instead of dangerous, that she'd build an empire and change lives, and prove every single person who doubted her absolutely wrong. She became you," Harrison said simply, "and you're the most remarkable person I've ever known." Lindsay turned in his arms, looking up at this man who'd helped her remember what love was supposed to feel like. "Thank you for seeing me when I was still learning to see myself. Thank you for letting me love you when you had every reason not to trust love. Somewhere across the city, Charlie Dean lived a quiet life working at a non-profit, dating Ruth who challenged him to be better, attending therapy faithfully, making amends where possible, and living with the knowledge of damage he could never undo. He'd seen the award ceremony online, watched Lindsay accept her honor with grace and power, and felt nothing but genuine happiness for her success. He'd become, finally, someone capable of celebrating another person's triumph without needing to diminish it or make it about himself. But his redemption was his own story, separate from Lindsay's, irrelevant to her happiness. She'd moved so far beyond him that his existence barely registered in her consciousness. When people asked about her ex-husband now, she spoke about him, the way you might discuss a storm you survived years ago, acknowledging it happened, grateful it passed, focused entirely on the sunshine that followed. Standing on that terrace in Harrison's arms, looking out at a city full of women she'd helped and organizations she'd transformed and a future still unfolding with infinite possibility, Lindsay understood that she hadn't just survived Charlie Dean's cruelty. She'd transcended it so thoroughly that his opinion of her, past, present or future, had become nothing more than whispers in a hurricane, barely audible beneath the roar of a woman who'd finally learned that the only voice that mattered was her own, and that voice was singing a song of triumph that would echo long after everyone who'd ever doubted her had faded into forgotten silence. The end.